Father, we love you. Let us not take anything that you have done or given to us for granted. I pray for revival, that we would be a part of the solution this world needs. And as we go through the word tonight, I pray that the Spirit would guide us, that we would say what you'd have us say, hear what you'd have us hear, that we would not read our own interpretation, but we would take exactly what you want us to get out of the text, that we would be here for one another, and that after tonight we would better know how to love each other, that we would bear one another's burdens. And it's in them we pray these things. Amen. All right, folks. So we're in 2 Samuel chapter 3, which, as David would say, is not Genesis 1. So we have some context to recap. Would anyone like to recap from just the first 5 books of the Bible, just the Genesis through Deuteronomy?
Super brief. You don't have to give specific stories or specific names or anything. Just kind of overarching.
Creation of the world, going through Israel, the beginning, God delivering him from Egypt, laws given to us.
Yeah. And so after they're given the law, they go through the wilderness, and they finally arrive at the promised land. And that brings us to the book of Joshua, in which they arrive at the promised land. And once they get there, they start to conquer the land. And so before Joshua dies, he comes to the people and says, "Hey, you got to be all in or all out. Are you going to do this whole law thing, be this whole, holy nation thing?" And the people say, "Yes, we will." And they don't. And so we get to the book of Judges, where as they're trying to conquer the promised land, the people of Israel are unfaithful. They don't take God's word seriously. And so they go through these just cycles of being, in subjugation by other powers, where they cry out to God, and God saves them through chosen champions called judges. And so at the beginning of 1 Samuel, we get the last judge, Samuel, and he is not only a judge, but he's also a priest, a prophet, and he leads mass revival in the nation of Israel after the rampant corruption in the priesthood. We saw with Eli that he was spiritually minded, but he did not know how to lead, and his sons they were abusing their power, and he did not discipline them. And so God had put a curse on that household, and so we see that Samuel rises to power, or not rises to power, but he steps up and he leads mass revival, and he grows old, but his sons are also not doing too well. And so the people ask for a king, like the nations. And, Samuel does not like this. He goes to God, and God says, "No, they didn't reject you, they rejected me. So just give them the king. Give them exactly what they wish for." And throughout the book of Samuel, we've seen how that's turned out for Israel. They got exactly what they asked for, and all the cost that comes along with that. We saw Saul, tall, dark, and handsome, exactly how you'd want a king to be if it was like the other nations. And so he starts off all right. He leads, he raises an army. He's very good at leading an army, but spiritually he is not good at leading the people. And so very quickly on, God rejects him as king and tells him that he has chosen a new king after his own heart. And so that ends up being, as we know, King David. David is anointed in secret, and he slowly makes his way into the courts, and we see David rising to power. You think he's going to become king then, but then he has to go on the run because Saul tries to kill him. But David refuses to kill the Lord's anointed. And so over the last, by the end of 1 Samuel, we see David finally stepping up to become king because, as we saw at the end of 1 Samuel, Saul dies in battle against the Philistines. And so we get started off 2 Samuel, and David hears about the death of Saul and his sons. And he's sad, He did not want Saul to die, but it had to happen for him to become king. And we see throughout chapter 1, he is mourning the loss of Saul and his sons. He's actually exalting them. We know by going through the story that they were not. Jonathan was good, but we saw that Saul was not the best spiritual leader, but yet David's praising him and exalting him. He takes the Lord very seriously, and therefore he takes the Lord's anointed very seriously. And so that leads us into chapter 2, and we saw in chapter 2, can anyone recap?
It was Abner and Joab, and someone was running after Abner, right? And he was really fast, and Abner kind of stopped and got him with his the head of the spear, the heavy part of the spear, and gutted him. Yeah. The butt of the spear, I think, not the butt.
The non-sharp part.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was whose men?
Huseman, yes.
So Abner, who was on the other side? Who was leading the other side?
Joab.
Joab. Yeah.
And they were Abner and his men were on a cliff of a mountain, and they were like at a dead end. And Abner was telling Joab, "How long does your sword have to thirst?" or something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of.
And yes. And then Joab's like, "Well, you should have just said so. I mean, this could have stopped, and we could have just, gone our separate ways."
Yeah, I didn't quite get that. So he was making fun of him, sort of, and he said his behavior. If you stopped fighting, like we would have stopped fighting.
Yeah, even then, you see, Joab wasn't exactly the best guy. Abner was appealing to. Well, he said, "How long, or shall the sword devour forever? Shall brother fight brother?" And Joab seemed to have no problem with brother fighting brother. He's like, we would have killed our brothers all night long if you hadn't said anything. So we also see a little bit into the character of Joab. But yeah, so Joab calls off the fight, and they both return to their places, right?
Right.
And
Then we see who comes out on top after the fight. Who had more men that died?
Of course.
Joab came out.
Joab
But
came out.
he did lose a brother by Abner.
He did, right. So I think it's important for us to know there's a lot of names, they kind of all start with the same letter, so it gets kind of confusing. So let's try and go through the names just because they're going to be in this chapter, and I feel like they'll be pretty important. So we have Saul's side. Saul is dead, but who is his commander? Abner, yes. And then we have David's side, and who is David's commander?
Joab.
And what is Joab's relation to David?
Cousin.
Close. It's his nephew.
Nephew.
It's his nephew, yeah. And then who is, Zeruiah, I think? The
Brother.
two brothers.
Yeah.
What are their names? They both start with an A.
I can't say it.
Asahel and, what was the other one? Abishai. So that's the two brothers' names, right? So Joab, Asahel, and Abishai are all brothers, and they come from Zeruiah, right? And that's so that's David's side, and Saul's side is Abner. So you can try and differentiate the sides, because their names are going to come up in here too, and it gets very confusing with all the names. But yes, Joab comes out on top, right? So Judah, they only lose, I think, 19 people plus Asahel, so I think 20 people total at the end of the fight. And I think that Saul's side, so Abner's side, they lose 360 or something crazy like that, a huge number. So they way won, right? So we know David is coming out on top. And remember that Judah and Israel are separate right now, right? So Israel is with Abner, right? And there's the short-term fulfillment right now of David having the kingship, but he's only king of Judah right now. So Judah and Israel separate, which kind of foreshadows the exile in the future whenever they're going to separate again. So.
all right. So I'll just go ahead and read the first slide. This will be verse 11. All right. Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And David grew steadily stronger, but the house of Saul grew weaker continually. Sons were born to David at Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon by Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and his second, Chileab, by Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite, and the third, Absalom the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, and the fourth, Adonijah the son of Haggith, and the fifth, Shephatiah the son of Abital, and the sixth, Ithream, by David's wife Eglah. These were born to David at Hebron. It came about, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. Now Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" Then Abner was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth, and said, "Am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I showed kindness to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hands of David. And yet today you charge me with a guilt concerning the woman? May God do so to Abner and more also, if as the Lord has sworn to David, I do not accomplish this for him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and to establish the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba." And he could no longer answer Abner a word, because he was afraid of him. Any thoughts? Interesting, cool facts?
Interesting paragraph for first line.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple things that stick out pretty pretty instantly.
Yeah. Were you gonna say something, George?
No, just like the artwork.
Oh yeah.
Always good. Nice slide.
Oh yeah.
Also, who?
Oh
Is that gonna
is
be
that
David?
AI?
I can't see.
These two pictures right here.
Yeah.
I think that's supposed to be Abner and Joab.
Abner.
I think.
I would assume so.
I think so. It's created by AI. Like it was something that you like type in, so it's actually like I mean it's art, but it was created. It's like AI generated art. So, but yeah, I think it's supposed to be Abner and Joab.
Alright, so I guess we'll start going through it verse by verse then. So it says, "Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David." So what is the house of Saul and the house of David?
Their families.
Yeah, like their families, or I guess in this case it could be also referring to like on a bigger scale, like Israel and Judah.
Mm.
I feel like this is the thesis. Like this is what's going on. There's a lot of people are behind David. A lot of people behind Saul.
Mm.
And
Or I
so
think behind Saul, right?
theoretically, the house of Saul and the house of David should be one nation, right?
Mm.
So if there is two halves of one nation at war, what is that called?
Civil War.
Civil war. Okay, so we're in the middle of a civil war. Just
Okay.
making sure we're starting off, establishing that. So we're in the middle of a civil war, which is not good. But then it goes on. So it says, "And David grew steadily stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker continually." So we see that, a little bit of a foreshadowing. It's pretty much just kind of explaining what is going to happen later on. Sons were born to David at Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon by Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and the second, Chileab by Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. That was a fun story. That was back in what chapter?
25.
It was something like that.
23. Do y'all remember the story of Abigail? Do y'all remember where he came from? Or where she came from? It was whenever David went to Nabal. I think it was after Saul died, right? Then him and his men went into, or not after Saul died. Samuel, yes, that's what I meant. I was like, that's not right. When Samuel died, I think, they went out into the wilderness, and then they needed food, and they were going to ask Nabal for food, but he didn't want to give him any, and so Abigail comes and gives him food and makes his peace with them, so that David and all his men don't go and attack and kill Nabal. And then Nabal ends up dying, and Abigail becomes his wife.
And I'm not entirely sure with Ahinoam. Did he pick her up after? I think it was after Abigail, right?
I think so, yeah.
I think that was one of those side mentions. It was like, and he also took Ahinoam as his wife.
Yeah, I think it was McCall, and I think the one that was after McCall was Abigail. I'm not 100% sure though, so don't quote me on that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I have to go back and look, but right off the bat, we see that's 3 women being mentioned already. One of which isn't even in here, but
Yeah.
And then we also have Absalom, which will be an important name, just not now, but it will be very important later on. The son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, and the fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, and the fifth Shephatiah, the son of Abital, and the sixth Ethrion by David's wife Eglah. They're all different women.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Literally all different. So, you know, David does a lot of things right, but maybe this isn't the best thing.
But he's still called a man after God's own heart. So this is
Yeah.
this is interesting to see, because we've seen David constantly rising and rising and rising, and there's this huge contrast between who David is and who Saul is. And we see Saul is pictured as this really evil, bad person, and basically just the image of someone who's against God and His will. And then we see David, and he's like this bright, shining light. Like he's like the light in the darkness, right? And he comes in. And he's doing all these things, and he's honoring God, and he's doing this awesome stuff. And you're like, oh my gosh, David is just great. But now we're starting to see, which we know later on, it's eventually going to get to David and Bathsheba and other things like that. So we know eventually he is going to fall. But we're seeing like tiny hints here and there that he still is mentioned as a man after God's own heart. But there is things that he's still not perfect at, and he has multiple wives, which we know is not God's intention of creation.
Yeah. Okay, so it came about that while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. So we talked about this, I think, last week, but we see that Abner, he's kind of more out for himself, making himself powerful. And we also saw that it was pretty clear that even though Ishbosheth he made Ishbosheth king. So we see that he's really the guy in charge of Israel right now. So nothing really new there, but you know, just important to stop and make note of that again. Now Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" So what's the issue here? I mean, there's a couple different issues, but. What is Ishbosheth probably thinking?
Why does David have more than one woman?
Well, so this is not David. This would be a Saul.
Saul.
Saul had a concubine. Saul's obviously dead. So, what is a concubine?
Not a wife.
Prostitute, something like that.
Wife that doesn't really get a choice. Well, no.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like
along those lines.
kind of like a wife, but more used for one purpose.
Yeah, that's pretty more.
But it's still like one of his like women, and so it says that he's trying to make himself, you know, powerful or strong in the house of Saul, and then at least Ishbosheth seems to think something is wrong. So Abner is doing things with one of Saul's concubines. So what is that kind of like?
Well, so earlier Abner wanted the throne, and the concubine, if he could have children, he could continue to expand by having even more children, and the more children he has, the better.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
He's thinking like this the whole time. He's like, he's scheming.
yeah. So I think that's at least what Ishbosheth would be concerned about,
Yes.
because you know he sees that Abner is kind of making a name for himself. He's establishing his dynasty, I guess you could say. And so, so just clarifying, that's what exactly he probably has in mind here. Then Abner was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth and said, "Am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I showed kindness to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hands of David. And yet today you charge me with the guilt concerning the woman." So what is Abner's response here? Because it's kind of an interesting response. He also doesn't really answer Ishbosheth's question either, does he?
He dodges
blows
it.
him off.
What's up?
Abner just blows off his question. Says,
Yeah, dodges it, yeah. What is he actually saying? Or at least what's his appeal?
Is that anything to do with allegiance?
Kind of,
Like
yeah.
fault finding? Like, he says fault finding, so is it aren't we friends? Like, why you being hate? Like, why hating you? Kind of thing?
Come on, man.
Yeah, basically, come on.
I haven't even given you into the hand of David, and you do this to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a less angry that he did the thing rather than he was angry. He was angry that he got caught.
Mm-hmm. What is the maybe if you reword it, like what is the purpose of what he said? So we know that from Ishbosheth's perspective, he's thinking that Abner's going to come in and he's going to be able to take power by having Saul's concubine. And so Abner hears this. What is his purpose of saying what he said? Like, what do you think? We said that he's kind of trying to like dodge the question. So like, how would what he said add to the idea of him trying to deflect or dodge the question? Maybe that'll help.
He doesn't want to be a pet to the house of Judah. He doesn't want to be part of the kingdom of Judah, like David. He doesn't want to be a part of it. He wants to
Mm-hmm.
have control over Israel and the rest of Israel, pretty much. He doesn't want to be David's pet. Kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay. Do y'all think the I am a dog's head of Judah, do you think that's like a good saying, or do you think that it's bad? Like, is that like a compliment, or is it supposed to be something that's supposed to dig at someone?
Probably more of a dig than a compliment.
It sounds
for sure.
like the head has to do with authority, like who's in power, and the animal is just like disrespect.
Yeah. We go.
So he's a puppet.
What'd you say, John?
I say he's being controlled as a puppet.
He's being controlled as a puppet. I think that Abner is trying to deflect from what Ishbosheth said, because we see it says, then Abner was very angry over the words of what Ishbosheth said. So I would think that, like, if someone was to come up to you and say something like what Ishbosheth said to Abner, and you were like in no way guilty, I don't know if you would be very angry towards someone, right? So I think he might be aware that he's like in the wrong, and so he's like, okay, like how do I like get out of the situation? And so he kind of uses like an insult, and since we know that Judah and Israel are kind of against each other, right? Because it's Israel Saul and Judah is David. He's using like the head of Judah as like an insult, like how dare would you call me something, like why would you try and convict me of something like that? Like are you saying that I'm like part of Judah? Like they're using the stigma, I think, that's around Judah as a way to like take a dig, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's also pretty bold because Abner's basically saying like you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me,
Mm-hmm.
because he's saying that like basically his form of steadfast love is to not like give him into the hand of David.
That's interesting to touch on too. We could probably talk about that. Usually, so steadfast love is what word?
Hesed.
Yeah, hesed, yeah. So, but we usually see hesed in positive context, right? And this is kind of a different context than I think what we usually see it in. So what do y'all think about that? To this day, I keep showing steadfast love to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not given you into the hand of David. What do y'all think about like the context that hesed is being used in this particular situation?
Continual support and being there for the people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure it's all unconditional.
Okay. Elaborate. What do you mean?
Well, let's just say that I support you. It's like I conditionally support you. Remember? So he signed it,
Yeah.
bringing up like, remember I loved you like all this time, and so now it's just feel like he's pulling in like his card, like his chips or something.
Yeah.
Get something out of it now.
It's used as like a sacrificing way, like oh, you could have been in the hands of David, but instead you're in charge because of me. I didn't have to do this, but I'm still continuing to love the house of Saul, even though I don't have to. I'm doing it anyway.
I think it's a lot like what Sean was saying. He was saying that like if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be here, type of thing. But it's also, I think, a way to maybe get Ishbosheth's like brain off of the idea that he was with Saul's concubine. It's almost like that saying whenever you say like, oh, my head hurts so bad, and someone's like, oh, I'll step on your toe, so then you like feel the like hurt of your toe and your head won't hurt anymore. I think it might kind of be something like that, to where he doesn't want him to be thinking about what's going on between him and his concubine, so that can be put on the back burner. And he's like, I could have given you over to the hand of David. Like, you're here because of me. And so he's using that as a way to like get on Ishbosheth's good side, maybe.
Yeah. And I guess also it's like the idea, like whenever you have like maybe a friend or a certain kind of friend maybe who does you wrong, and when you ask them about it, their response is less about the actual thing they did, and then they try to make you think about all the things they've done for you in the past to kind of deflect the blame. It's like almost like the idea, or it's like, you know, look at all the stuff I did for you before, and it's like, well, you still did this thing, so you're still guilty. But I think he's both appealing to the fact that he's been there for Saul all along, and also the fact that he's the kind of the one in power. So, yeah.
He's sugarcoating.
But yeah. And also the other thing with Hesed we know is that it's also something that we don't deserve. And so he's also kind of saying like, you know, you have no right, like you don't like have no right to ask for this. You don't deserve it. And so it's like kind of, I don't know the word for it, but yeah. So does that all make sense? May God do so to Abner and more also, if as the Lord has sworn to David, I do not accomplish this for him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and to establish the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to even Beersheba. So what does he say here?
Who's saying this?
It's a continuation of the same, so it's Abner.
It's kind of weird because it says his name in the sentence, right? It's kind
Yeah.
of confusing. It's like he's talking in like third person in that word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Abner, he was just kind of saying like, you know, I've been doing all these things for you. You know, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me. But like, it's almost like you repaid me good with evil kind of thing. Like, I did all these things, and yet you charged me today with a fault concerning a woman. And so now he turns and says, God do so to Abner and more also, if I do not accomplish for David what the Lord has sworn to him. That is, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba.
Okay, so it's saying Abner doesn't want David to get the rest of Israel, like the Lord has promised him.
God do so to Abner and more also if I do not. I is who? Who is I in that sentence? Who's talking?
Abner.
So God do so to Abner and more also if I, Abner, do not accomplish for David what the Lord has sworn to him. So does he want to accomplish what David is supposed to have, which is the kingship, or does he not?
Actually, I guess.
So what do you think's going on between Abner and Ishbosheth? We know Abner is part of Saul's side. and Ishbosheth is like one of Saul's like way off sons. I think we kind of talked about him maybe being like a son of a concubine or something. So they're both on Saul's side, and now Abner's saying, God do to me more also if I do not accomplish what the Lord has sworn to him. What do you think is going on now with their relationship?
Oh, so why is Abner trying to get
Well,
the transfer to Saul? If he's, so maybe he's more on Saul? No?
Abner's on that?
So Abner here is leaning towards helping Saul out. But
Helping
you just said
Saul
it's
out?
not. Yes, but you said all those other people are Abner, right?
Helping David,
Under Saul?
helping David out.
Yeah, it's like a bit of a transition here. Like, so he's all, annoyed, or he's very angry at Ishbosheth. So he's basically saying like, I'm just gonna go over to David instead. God do so to Abner and more also. So it's like the idea of like, may God, so punish me, and or even worse, if I don't do this. So he's actually going to David's side.
Switching.
Which
It even says more. It even says more also, like more and more and more and more. Also.
Which I think, let's just think about this from like, okay, remember we said beginning of the chapter, we're in a civil war right now, right? We're in a civil war. Okay, Abner is, what did we say that his position was over on Saul's side?
General.
The commander of Saul's army. And Abner saying, I think I'm going to go here and join David's side because I'm mad at you, Ishbosheth. What does that say about maybe Saul, what he's established, and Abner as a leader?
Not good.
He's
Not
a weak,
too hot.
He's a weak commander.
Yeah, not too hot, right? Which we already kind of saw because they lost 360 men in the past chapter. But we see that Saul is dead. Abner's left in charge of these people, and he's really just wanting to take power for himself. But the tiniest thing that makes him mad, he's like, peace out, I'm going to David's side. I'm going over here to help him because I'm mad at you. And he might be a little bit more concerned about like vengeance instead of maybe doing God's will, I would think.
And plus, the army's just getting weaker and weaker because of the civil wars.
Yeah,
At some
it's
point in time, he's gonna have no army.
exactly, yeah, because it says that even it says just like what you're saying, David's getting stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. Yeah, so we see that separation, and now the commander of Saul's side that's getting weaker and weaker is going to go over to David's side. Yikes, not good.
Yeah, from like an opportunist standpoint, which Abner seems to be a bit of an opportunist. It's like to him it would be like the best choice to make because, so he sees that Ishbosheth is not a very good ruler. He sees the house of Saul growing weak, but he sees David's house growing stronger, and so it makes sense that he would switch sides now, and then perhaps also he can win over David's favor, and that would actually he'd be better off on the winning side of David than the losing side of Ishbosheth. So it's still obviously self-seeking. But it is cool that in the same sentence he also acknowledges that the Lord has sworn to him that he will rule over all of Israel, which is pretty cool. But also considering that he already knew that and didn't exactly start sooner.
Yeah. That's about right. Also, if you want to think kind of ahead, well, we have to look back to look ahead. But we know Abner had a little situation in the last chapter with Asahel, right? Whenever that was the person that was really fast running, right? And that Asahel was from what side?
King
David's side. And who's over on David's side?
His brother Joab.
Joab. And what did we say we don't do to Joab?
You don't kill his brother.
Yeah, we don't mess with Joab. So over here, Abner on his own side with Saul is mad at Ishbosheth. And now Abner says, I'm going to David's side. Good luck. He's going to go to the other side. But now he's going to go to the other side, and the person who's commander over there is Joab. So really both sides that he's on, he's just put himself in a kind of a rut.
He's screwed either way.
Exactly, which is why the name of the chapter is The Death of Abner. Yeah. Yikes.
Yeah.
But we see that trouble is just following Abner. So if you want to think ahead, like even in this situation, he's still in a rut. Like he thinks he's escaping it, but he's really not, because he's going to the side where Joab is commander, and nobody else over there wants to mess with Joab. So who's going to support Abner and being like, hey, let's fight against Joab. No one wants to fight against Joab. No one wants to fight against him.
Yeah, no one's gonna trust him.
Exactly.
But that's what happens whenever you are like Abner and you're always seeking your own glory or just your own advancement, is that you end up burning bridges, you end up getting yourself in a rut, and eventually you will not be able to escape. And in many cases, it will lead to your death. So, you know, there is a lesson there.
And I might even talk about a little bit how the people that you associate yourself with can really influence you, because we see here that Abner had some type of clue of a situation of what was going on with David and that God was going to establish his kingdom through David. But Abner still chose to be around Saul, and we see what has followed Abner from being with Saul. And we know the character of Saul, he wasn't that great. He was pretty evil. He was doing things against God's will. And then we see Abner and his character. For all we know, if he would have maybe aligned more with David, he wouldn't have necessarily been in certain situations that he was in. But because he probably surrounded himself with Saul, I think that could have been an influence. Just so maybe the people that you surrounded yourself with, they do have an influence on your character and how you do things, just because that's what you see as an example, and that's what you're surrounded by. So,
Yeah, definitely true. And it says that he could no longer answer Abner a word because he was afraid of him. Probably pretty reasonably so.
Yeah.
Right. I will read through verse 19. Then Abner sent messengers to David in his place, saying, "Whose is the land? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel over to you." He said, "Good. I will make a covenant with you, but I demand one thing of you. Namely, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see me." So David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, to whom I was betrothed, for 100 foreskins of the Philistines." Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, from Paltiel the son of Laish. But her husband went with her, weeping as he went, and followed her as far as Bahurim. Then Abner said to him, "Go, return." So he returned. Now Abner had consultation with the elders of Israel, saying, "In times past you were seeking for David to be king over you. Now then, do it. For the Lord has spoken of David, saying, By the hand of my servant David I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines, and from the hand of all their enemies." Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin, and in addition, Abner went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel and to the whole house of Benjamin. Any thoughts?
So, interesting, it mentions a character that we've known about, but we haven't heard for a while. David's first wife that he married, that Saul gave to him. He killed, got 100 foreskins, killed a bunch of Philistines, gave it to Saul, and Saul gave him his daughter. Saul's daughter to David. But then when David ran away, Saul gave his daughter to another man. So his one requirement to have Abner come with him is to give him his wife back.
Interesting.
It's interesting.
I also remember that story too. So it's like David's a good guy, so like he's trying to trick him, but he still does the right thing, right? So if they're trying to
Well,
get
it's-
David somehow.
Like we've seen throughout all of Samuel, there's a lot of gray area, and it's really hard to say good, bad. It's just a little more complicated than that. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it. But I think this is one of those scenarios where David, you can see where he's coming from because he has no reason to trust Abner. And so he's making a demand that would seem to confirm that he's legit. Because, I mean, it's Abner. That makes sense that he would try to scheme, right?
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, it's a very intelligent political move. But we also see that there's consequences for that. And so, some people might win, some people lose. It's kind of a handful. So, what do we remember about Nicole character back whenever we first met her?
she loved David, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. There's like that one little thing. I mean, we didn't learn a whole lot about her. There was like that one little detail that at least made you kind of scratch your head a little bit about her.
I can't remember what that is, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, whenever David escaped, the guards that Saul sent after him, and then Michal said that David threatened her to let him escape.
Oh, so I guess it was the lie, but I think I'm referring more so to the idols, because wasn't there idols in the house?
Mhm.
Yeah, almost like it's almost like a call back to Rachel and Jacob, where Rachel was the beautiful woman he loved, but she secretly had idols with her the whole time. And I don't know if that's an intentional callback, but I wouldn't be too surprised if it was. Just something to consider, I guess.
Abner is not just getting Saul's daughter; he's also talking to the elders of Israel to like bring the kingdoms back together as a whole.
And that makes sense from Abner's standpoint, because he also probably realizes that if he needs to not get like instantly killed, he probably needs to go, go out there and clear things up. But it is interesting to me that David does agree to this covenant. Obviously, he seems to think that that's going to help out.
Do you want to go through it verse by verse?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay, so it says, and Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf, saying, "To whom does the land belong? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring over all Israel to you." So what do we think about that?
So does start making the point that Saul has the rest of Israel from moving forward?
Say that again?
Saul doesn't have Israel? Oh, never mind.
Saul doesn't have Israel?
Well,
As I said, I thought David got.
so remember, right now there's King. David is only king over Judah,
Yeah.
and
so-
Ishbosheth is king over like Benjamin, Israel, over all Israel.
Mhm.
So basically everywhere else.
Everywhere but Judah.
So who has Israel at this point?
So
Saul's side.
so Saul's house still has the majority of Israel as a whole. It's
Okay.
referring to Israel versus Judah, which is
Okay.
foreshadowing,
Yeah.
later on. So right now David is he's anointed king in Judah. So he's only king of Judah,
Okay.
and Saul's son is king everywhere else.
Cool.
Abner's sending messengers to David saying, "Make a covenant with me, and you'll have all of Israel."
Yeah. So what is he actually? What are they actually saying here? What is it? What is a covenant?
It's an agreement. Simple terms of an agreement that you cannot break.
Yeah. Like an alliance or a
Contract.
contract, a peace treaty.
And usually covenants are a two-way thing, right?
Yeah.
So we see like way back in Genesis, God makes a covenant. Is it with Abraham that he splits the animals, right? But we see that's a one-way covenant, right? They split the animals and God passes through the animals, but Abraham doesn't. So it's showing that God is going to be faithful and he will keep his covenant to Abraham, no matter if Abraham and his people necessarily follow the rules that God gives or not, right? There would be consequences for what they do, but God's not going to break his covenant to them because he passed through those animals and he made a covenant. But here it's make your covenant with me. So they're saying,
Two-way.
Abner, make your covenant with David and you and your people, the house of Judah. So it's supposed to be a two-way type thing. So they're coming to an agreement, yeah. But I think it's important to note that covenants, that they're a two-way thing. And like you were saying, they're very binding. They're very binding. Okay, so then we get to verse 13. And he said, "Good, I will make a covenant with you, but one thing I require of you, That is, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. Interesting. We've kind of touched on it a little bit. What do y'all think about it?
So,
What's weird?
fair trade.
What'd you say?
Fair trade, I guess.
A fair trade. Why so? Why do you think it might be a fair trade?
I mean, David probably hasn't seen Michal in forever.
Mm-hmm.
Abner wants to be part of his kingdom, so let me have my first wife back, and then maybe you'll be able to see me.
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Why do you think? Because David could probably ask for anything. What do you think? Maybe the purpose behind him saying, "Bring me Michal." Like, what? Why is that like a heavier thing? Why would that be something? They're forming a covenant, something that's what you talked about being really binding. You were saying he's kind of trying to prove something. Why would it be Michal that he would bring?
Michal is Saul's daughter. So it's the kingdom of Saul.
Yeah. Yep.
Not
So-
something that Abner would do if he was trying to scheme against David.
So let's build off what Sean was saying. If let's say that Abner is being sneaky, right? He wasn't actually trying to make a covenant. What would be a reason you would think that Abner would want to come in and act like he wants to make a covenant with David? What would be a reason that he would want to do that?
So he could get close enough to overthrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to try and figure out maybe his tactics, to figure out the strategies of his army. We see that he's really successful. He's trying to get into the system. This is like war tactic, right? Remember, we're at a civil war right now. This is like, you go read history books and this type of stuff happens, right? He's going to try and infiltrate the system, and he's going to try and figure out what's going on, and he's going to kind of maybe try to play a double agent or something like that. I'm not saying that's what we're seeing here. I'm saying in a different situation, what would be a reason he'd want to, right? He's trying to figure out what's going on. But here, David's kind of thinking, I think, one step ahead. He's like, okay, Abner wants to come and join this side. Okay, you want to join this side? We'll see. But how can I prove maybe his faithfulness and that he actually wants to come to my side, and then he's not trying to infiltrate the system? And that's why David says, you should bring me Michal. Because if he's just trying to get in there, figure out what's going on, get out so that he can come, he's not going to bring over Saul's daughter, right? That's a big thing. And so I think it's trying to prove where Abner's headspace is at, because David can't read his mind. He's trying to kind of figure out where his motivations are. And something like that is bigger than saying, I want this many sheep and this many heaps of grain and this many livestock, and like getting physical things. There's a little bit more weight to bringing a person, and especially if it's Saul's daughter and his previous wife, I think. But yeah.
I mean, not that long ago, where was David at before he came back to Israel to become king? He was with the Philistines, and so, you know, it would have been that long ago when he himself at least had the appearance of a double agent, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, if anyone has the experience to think one step ahead like that, it's him.
It's very true.
Because remember, what was the concern of the Philistines in the first place was he had been doing stuff for them all these years, and there's like, if there was one time for, you know, David to go in there and kill the king of the Philistines to win over Saul's favor, it was going to be then at that battle, and that's why he got sent back, and ultimately didn't have to be there whenever Saul died. And so I just call back to that, because I feel like there's definitely kind of not a callback, but you know, it's something that's going to probably be in the back of David's mind.
I definitely think so.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to verse 14. Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the bridal price of 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Let's just start with that. Okay, what do we think? Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the bridal price of 100 foreskins to the Philistines. So what's David saying?
It's his wife. He paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
So he should have it.
Mm-hmm.
So how did alliances work? How does it work back in the day? Like, how do they pair up? Like, how does it help them?
Wait, how does it help that?
So like, yeah.
How does it help that David gets Michal back? Is that what you're saying? Like, what is the benefit of having Michal back?
Yeah.
I think it's just to prove Abner what side he lies on. If he's actually being true with his words that he wants to say, stay over on David's side. I think it's more of a way to probably prove what Abner is saying. I don't know if I don't think it's necessarily something specifically about having Michal back, but it's like the what Michal represents. It represents Saul, who is the person that is against David. It's the side that is against David. The place that Abner comes from, the daughter of Saul, the king who tried to kill David. So I think it's more of what Michal probably represents than like actually Michal herself. Does that kind of answer your question?
So she represents something.
Is that like saying we had a covenant when I paid you and then you gave me that? And it's like showing, are you going to hold up this covenant before going into another one?
Yeah, I think so. Give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the bridal price of 100 foreskins to the Philistines. I think it's. I think he's trying to prove the ownership that he had over Michal. Whenever he went and Saul was like, "Hey, go fight all of these Philistines, and bring back their foreskins. And if you kill all these Philistines for me, I'll give you Michal. I'll give you my daughter." And so I think he's calling back to that to try and show Abner, like, hey, that was something that I earned, I guess you could say. But then we come to the situation, like we were saying, that this is like, is David in the right or is David in the wrong? It's kind of a sticky situation, right? So what do y'all think about that? Or why would it be a sticky situation? What about this is kind of like, because whenever I read this, you're kind of trying to figure out, you're like, okay, like, yes, David did have his wife, like, did have Michal as a wife, but things have happened since then. So what about this makes it kind of a sticky situation, if that makes sense?
Well, you're not supposed to have more than one wife.
That's one thing. Not supposed to have more than one
She's
wife.
already married again.
Yes, she's been given to someone else, right? So she's been given to somebody else, and he already has a whole bunch of wives. But especially the part that she already has somebody else, we're gonna see the ramifications of that as we read through this. And it makes it kind of a sticky situation where you're trying to figure out, okay, I see where David's motivation is coming from, but when you're dealing with sinful human beings, there's still corruption in all of these decisions, right? Because we see that David's heart is, from at least what we're reading, we're seeing that his motivation is trying to figure out where Abner stands and where his motivation behind coming to David's side is. But even in that, that itself is not necessarily a bad thing. He's trying to probably protect his people, right? He's the king of Judah. He doesn't want to just blindly let Abner in, and then he comes in and kills all of his men, right? So he's trying to be probably smart tactically. They're in a civil war. He knows that Saul's side is against them right now. So I would imagine he's trying to be smart, right? He's trying to protect his people. So he's trying to figure out, is Abner being real with this? What can I do that would prove, get him to bring Michal over? But within that, we see the corruption of the fact that he was married to Michal, and at one time it was his wife, but then he left, and then Saul gave her to somebody else, so now she's someone else's wife. So it's like, okay, how does that work? Because she's going to be taken away. She was already taken away from David, given to someone else. Now she's going to be taken away again and given back to David. So you see how it's kind of like a weird situation. You know what I mean? Where the motivation might not be wrong, which we see David's motivation isn't necessarily wrong. He's thinking from a military tactical perspective and trying to be smart. But within that, there's corruption, and there's things that are going on that are like, oh, these are still sinful human beings that we're dealing with. And so that's kind of a thing we have to like wrestle through as we read it.
Yeah, if we're going to go back to the question of the day, David might be thinking like, oh, is it... So, he knows that God is going to put him on the throne over all Israel, right? And we see, Abner coming to David, and David has to ask himself, okay, so is it a coincidence that Abner is coming to me and like asking for a covenant because it could help him get on the throne? But at the same time, is this part of God's plan to get on the throne? Like, is God working through this, or like, is this just coincidence? Like, it seems like something that could help him get on the throne, but actually gets him killed. And then to go along with what you're saying, like, with the corruption in the situation, we also see that being in positions of authority also seems to have more, like, people in authority, the things they do are going to have consequences that affect more than just them.
Yes.
And so, well, really we've seen that throughout all Samuel, really, is that the quality of the leader does determine oftentimes the quality of the people's faithfulness. So under Samuel they did well, under Saul they didn't do so well. And so, like, everything that David's going to do is going to have an effect on people around him.
And I don't know necessarily if this part is supposed to make you think back to this, or if it's necessarily supposed to connect, but when I read this, this is what I think. Way back in Samuel, whenever the people asked for a king, they said, I want a king like the nations. And Samuel says, sure, you can have one, but here's the warning. What did Samuel tell the people that the kings would do to them? Take. He would take and take and take. Take your wives, take your children, take your things, your possessions. He would take your stuff, right? I don't know if this is necessarily you're supposed to be thinking that, but it makes me think about it whenever I read it. Just because David's not thinking, oh, I want to take McCall. I don't think he's not like thinking deceptively. But we see that is kind of something that happens. David's in power. He's starting to get closer and closer to kingship. He's building up this power. And it's just kind of following him. It's just kind of happening as he's gaining this authority. He's taking things, not necessarily on purpose, but it just follows these different things he's having to do as being part of a king. So that's something I thought of also. But we can continue. We'll read 15 to 16. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband Paltiel, the son of Laish. But her husband went with her, weeping after her all the way to Bahurim. Then Abner said to him, go, return, and he returned. What do y'all think about that?
Very sad.
So sad, right? So this whole time, I mean, it's not like this has been a few months situation
Years.
where it hasn't been a few months. Right, yeah, it's been an extended amount of time. We're talking about years since David and Michal have not been in marriage with one another. David has went off into the wilderness. Saul has died. He's gone to the Philistines. He's now become king of Judah. Like, he's been gone for a little bit. And all this time, for most of the time, Michal has been with her other husband. And now all of a sudden, a messenger, just imagine, like you're married to someone, all of a sudden a messenger comes to your door, knocks on your door, and it's like, hey, I need to take your wife. The king of Judah wants her. It's like, what? All right. Well, one, that probably kind of puts him in an awkward situation, because it's like the king of Judah is asking for your wife, and I would assume he knows, like if he's married to Michal, I would assume that he knows that Michal was married to David at one time. But that kind of puts him in a weird situation. It's like, well, do I say no to the king? But also it's just really sad. They've been married for a long time, an extended amount of years, and all of a sudden he's just like, hey, I need your wife. And he has really no choice but to go and give her. And so he just weeps, and then he goes back home. He leaves. It's sad. And then that just kind of highlights the corruption of it too. But we move on to 17. And Abner conferred with the elders of Israel, saying, for some time past you have been seeking David as king over you. Now then, bring it about, for the Lord has promised David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies. Abner also spoke to Benjamin, and then Abner went to tell David at Hebron all that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin thought good to do. What do y'all think about those verses?
Abner's reminding them that they were a fan of David and they wanted him to be ruler over all of Israel at one point.
Yeah, so Abner's talking to Israel, which would be which side? Like David's side or Saul's side?
Salsa.
Yeah, because remember it's Israel and Judah. So Abner conferred with the elders of Israel, saying, "For some time past you've been seeking David as king over you. Now then bring it about, for the Lord has promised David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of their enemies."
Is that him trying to convince Israel that he really is coming to their side?
I would think so.
Yeah, he's not talking to like David's side, trying to convince them. He's like talking to Saul's, like the house of like where Saul rules, or Saul's son rules.
I would think that, think about whenever David he got into the courts of Saul, right? He starts to rise through the ranks. Saul's still king, but remember whenever he would be at the gateway and the people would see not Saul passing in and out, he saw David passing in and out. And he said, Saul kills his thousands, but David kills his tens of thousands, right? And David is the one that they see passing in and out of the gateways and fighting for them. And David, he was popular. And at that time, people were all unified, right? It wasn't Israel and Judah. They were all one people at that time. And so I think that Abner's trying to say, hey guys, remember that time whenever you wanted David king over you? Whenever Saul was in charge, but David was doing all the heavy lifting? And y'all really liked David, and y'all would follow him, and you wanted him to have power, you wanted him to be the leader, you trusted him. I think he might be trying to call back to that a little bit, to try and sway their decision to be like, but do remember that, David was a pretty good leader. I think he might be trying to remind them of that so they can go away from being separated from them and kind of align with David again. That's what I think is kind of going on.
Yeah, that's kind of how I read it. It's like, and it also does kind of show. We saw like little bits of it throughout the text, but like we just kind of see a glimpse into like some of the unspoken like things going on and behind the scenes, where we see that while Saul was in charge, seems like a lot of the other elders were not so happy with him, and so yeah, I think he's just mainly appealing to that. He's saying like, hey, now is our chance. Before Saul was in charge and David was on the run, and then he was with the Philistines. Now Saul's dead, Ishbosheth is weak. David already has Judah. He's saying like, this is the time to, let David become the king. Mm-hmm. And then, he goes back and I guess they must have had a positive response to that. And so he goes back and reports to David. Because obviously David would not be in Israel, so.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I read it. Does that make sense?
Anything else before we go to the next one?
Then Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron. And David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Abner said to David, "Let me arise and go and gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may be king over all that your soul desires." So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. And behold, the servants of David and Joab came from a raid and brought much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the army that was with him arrived, they told Joab, saying, "Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has sent him away, and he has gone in peace." Then Joab came to the king and said, "What have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why then have you sent him away, and he has already gone? You know Abner the son of Ner, that he came to deceive you, and to learn of your going out and coming in, and to find out all that you are doing." Any thoughts?
Joab sees through his plan. Joab knows what he's doing. He's got the war brain.
Yep, and also, that he doesn't have for personal reasons, he has a kind of a bias towards Abner anyways. Like, even if Abner had truly had a change of heart, he still would have responded the same.
Yeah.
So we do see a little bit into Joab's character here,
Mm-hmm.
for the better or worse.
Well, 22, 23, 24 all end with, and he has gone in peace.
Oh wow. I didn't even see that.
Yeah, there is definitely a emphasis there that it's like, I think Joab to some degree is kind of dumbfounded
Mm.
that David would do that. That he sent him off in peace and he didn't, take him while he had the chance, kind of thing.
Actually, I was kind of wondering, what is the context there of like peace versus like what were you saying? Like on?
Well, I'm just saying, like, okay, so imagine that the commander of your enemy house comes to the king, where he could have killed him or kept him captive, so Joab could have came back and killed him himself and had all that fun. You come back and you learn that he just let Joab go in peace, and you're like,
You had him.
he's like, he was just here.
Which I don't know if it reminds you of the same thing, but think about whenever Saul was after David and he was hunting him down in the wilderness, and there was multiple times
Yeah.
where Saul and David came this close to each other, and what did David's men always tell him?
Kill him while you had the chance.
Kill him while he has the chance. He always said, God's delivered him over to you. Saul's right here, and you have the chance to kill him, right? And David always says, I'm not going to touch God's anointed, right? So it kind of gives me kind of that same type of situation going on, kind of a flashback to that. He's saying, you have him right here. He's in your hands. Why would you not do with him the way that people who are enemies usually would, right? If you have the chance, if you go look in history textbooks and just history in general, civil wars, if the enemy is like right there, they're going to take advantage of it. He's saying, why would you not do that? That would give us the one up, and we could not have to fight against these people anymore. The Civil War would be over. So he's saying you lost this really big opportunity.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of reasons. I mean, I feel like to some degree David has to acknowledge the fact that ultimately, in order for him to be on the throne, Abner has to go.
Yeah.
Like, regardless, like, it does make you wonder what his ultimate end game is here with this whole covenant and whatnot. Like, what he would do, or whether he just trusts that God would take care of it. But, I mean, he knows that, Abner, kind of like with Jonathan, he knows that, Jonathan can't stay alive while he's on the throne. Same, likewise, Abner can't be in the picture if David wants to actually be on the throne, especially as scheming as Abner is. So there's plenty of reason to take care of him. I mean, even though Abner being on his side might help him, at the same time, it'd probably be even more helpful if he was just out of the picture entirely, because he wouldn't have to worry about him turning on him, and without Abner, Ishbosheth is weak. So yeah, I think it does seem to, like, even if it's not like a specific callback, the character trait there is very much the same. He not only chose not to kill him, but he actually sent him off in peace. And the same thing with Saul. The closest thing that he did was cut off the piece of his cloak.
Yeah.
But he actually, he sent him off in peace.
Yeah. And he felt guilty for it too. Just cutting off a piece of the cloak.
Yeah. And so even though Abner isn't the Lord's anointed in the sense of being the king, he is still the commander of the Lord's anointed. And so I think there is probably that sense of respect there. Yeah, it just tells you a little bit about David's character there.
He's on a different level.
Yeah.
He runs things a bit differently.
Which shows, I think, we see over and over again, which I think we're going to see later in the chapter 2, that David's idea of how he wants to run his kingdom is way different from what everyone else thinks, right? Because you have to remember, a lot of these people are going to be the same people that were, give us a king like the nations. And so they had Saul, and then they had Saul, and they're like, oh, we don't really like Saul. And then David comes along like, you're pretty cool, we like you, we're going to follow you. But over and over again, there's other people within David's courts, or people that are under him that serve him, that do things that David would not necessarily approve of, because David's just kind of on a different level. Like, he thinks a lot different than all of these other people, and he definitely is not trying to run a kingship like Saul did, right? He's a man after God's own heart. He's trying to honor the Lord with all that he does, and so we see that he definitely is thinking on a different level than everyone else. So.
It's kind of interesting, like for like some of the older people here, they actually would have been probably around since like the end of Samuel's reign or rule. Because I mean, Samuel would have gone. He would have been old, but I mean, I forget. Well, probably not, because I guess Saul did reign for quite a while.
Yeah.
Was it 40 years or was it? Yeah. Okay, maybe not then.
Yeah.
They might be barely croaking.
Yeah.
So.
Y'all ready to go verse by verse? Yes? Okay. When Abner came with 20 men to David at Hebron, David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with them. And Abner said to David, I will arise and go and will gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went with peace. Okay, what happens there? Abner comes. What happens? What's
Celebration.
Yep, he
Abner
makes peace.
says, I will go to all of Israel and make a covenant with them, and you can rule over them.
Mm-hmm. So he's basically telling David, the kingship's coming your way. That's basically what he's telling him. And David sends him away, and he goes in peace. Then we get to verse 22. Just then the servants of David arrived with Joab from a raid, bringing much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David at Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. Okay, paint the picture. David just sent Abner away. Then what happens?
Joab arrives.
Joab and the servants arrive. So we see that Abner and Joab barely miss each other. David, he's like, hey, I'm going to get Israel to make a covenant with you. And then he's like, cool, I'm going to send you away. And Abner goes away. And then just as that happened, it's like Joab and his men walked up. That's just so cool. Like, I love that part because they just like barely missed each other. And you know the strife that they have between each other. And it's just like a face-off waiting to happen. It's like, you're almost there, but not quite yet. Like, these people are in a civil war against each other, and they just barely missed each other. Barely just, like, locking eye contact. Like, so close. So close.
I'm thinking, like, you know, almost like a spin door, like two doors, like they just...
Yeah, like the spinning doors that are in front of, like, skyscrapers. Exactly, yes. Have any of y'all read or seen Romeo and Juliet? Y'all know, like, the Capulet and Montague, I think that's how you say them, how they have like this like strife against each other. That's what the story of this reminds me of, like Israel and Judah, so Saul against David. That's exactly what it reminds me of. And this just, especially whenever, like last chapter when they went and sat across from the pool from each other, I was like, this sounds like it's straight from Romeo and Juliet, whenever like Montague and Capulet fight against each other. Anyways, that's besides the point. We get to verse 23. When Joab and all the army that was with him came, it was told Joab, Abner, the son of Ner, came to the king, and he has let him go, and he has gone in peace. Then Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is it that you have sent him away so that he is gone? You know that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you, and to know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you are doing. Okay, the plot thickens. What happens?
I like the funny and happy, even at the end, they're like accusing him, like spying. Like, he's just watching you. He's just looking at what you're doing.
Yeah.
What you're up to, kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he kind of thinks what we were talking about earlier. What would be a reason that Abner would come in to try and infiltrate the system and figure out what you're doing so that he can go prepare his men to come and fight your men and win. So that's what he's thinking from the same perspective, just like what you were saying. Yeah. And Joab and all the army that was with him came. It was told Joab, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has let him go, and he has gone in peace. Okay. What do we think Joab would think? Right here. Abner. We're talking Abner, and his people just came. Someone walks up to Joab and was like, hey, Abner and his men were just here. What do we think Joab's? What is he thinking in his head?
Aren't you keeping here a little bit longer?
Exactly, yeah. And then we're going to see. Then Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is it that you have sent him away so that he is gone? Joab is not a happy camper right now. He's like, you had Abner in your hands. And we have to remember that he's not only mad, or I guess against Abner because he's from Saul's side. Abner killed his brother. He killed Asahel, remember, so he was the one that was the faster runner. So he kind of has like two vendettas against him. And so I would think, I feel like just from Joab's character, I feel like it's more probably heavily on the side that he killed his brother versus being against the house of God. I don't know what y'all think, but I feel like it's probably more because Asahel died, because we know Joab is not, he's on David's side, but we've seen that Joab is not necessarily also a man after God's own heart. He's just the commander under David who's a man after God's own heart. He doesn't always have the best intentions, so I think...
He just wants on the winning side.
Exactly, yeah. You know that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you, and you know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you are doing. So just like George was saying, Joab is kind of thinking here, like, why would you trust Abner? Like, he's going to come in here. Well, not only did he kill my brother, and not only is he against us, you had the chance to kill him, but now you let him go away, and so he's going to go back and he's going to tell his men, this is how many men they have, this is the type of weapons that they have, this is the way that, they're in formation, all these different things he's figured out from being in the system. He's going to go tell the other men, he's going to come here, and he's going to beat us, right? So it's like the straw on the camel's back. He's like, there's another thing. Like, what are you doing, David?
It's two stories in the same chapter of the commander, like, almost scolding their king.
Yikes. Not good. This just not good. Okay. We progress.
6. When Joab came out from David, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sirah. But David did not know it. So when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the middle of the gate to speak with him privately. And there he struck him in the belly so that he died on account of the blood of Asahel his brother. Afterward, when David heard it, he said, I and my kingdom are innocent before the Lord forever of the blood of Abner the son of Ner. May it fall on the head of Joab and all his father's house. And may there not fail from the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or who is a leper, or who takes the hold of a distaff, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai his brother killed Abner because he had put their brother Asahel to death in the battle at Gibeon. Then David said to Joab and all the people who were with him, tear your clothes and gird on sackcloth and lament before Abner. And King David walked behind the bier. Thus they buried Abner in Hebron. And the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. The king chanted a lament for Abner and said, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, nor your feet put in fetters. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen.
Okay. Let's just start going this one verse by verse because I know we're close to the time we should be. So we'll go through this a little quicker.
Okay.
So when Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern at Sirah, but David did not know about it. So we see Joab leaves David. Joab's not happy. He leaves David, and he sent messengers after Abner. So we see that Joab, I guess, is kind of trying to take things into his own hands, right? He's like, well, David, if you're not going to handle Abner in the correct way, you're just going to let our enemy go away and now know all of our tactics. I guess I'll just rule over the king of Judah and just be like, hey, messengers, let's go and chase after Joab. Probably not the best decision, but he does it. And they brought him back from the cistern at Sirah, but David did not know about it. See that clarifier? But David did not know about it. I think that's probably the author's way of cluing us in to be like, hey, this isn't a smart decision because David is the king of Judah and you probably shouldn't go against him, right? So Joab sends messengers for Abner. They bring Abner back. David doesn't know about it. Probably not the best situation. And when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the midst of the gate to speak with him privately, and there he struck him in the stomach, so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. So it's revealed. What do y'all think about this?
Isn't it similar to the way he killed his brother? In the stomach, just the actual pointy side of it.
Yes, very similar, very similar.
I think it's interesting how he came back and went with Joab privately somewhere. Abner is a smart guy. I don't think he was thinking very properly. He knows he killed his brother. He knows what happened, what would happen if he killed his brother. But he came back, went with him privately, where probably nobody could see him. Probably. Why would you do that?
You should have seen it coming.
Something is
knowing that
going to happen to you.
Especially because remember whenever
Right.
Asahel was originally chasing after him, and it was like Asahel didn't turn right or left, and he was chasing after, and then Abner looked behind him, and he's like, Asahel, is that you? And he's like, yes, it is. He's like, please, do not kill me. Go and kill anybody else. How would I ever look your brother in the face? So even before he ever even killed Asahel, he knew, don't mess with Joab and his people. But now we see him here, and Joab's like, hey, dude, can you come to the side so I can talk to you? And Abner's just like, okay. Like, it is kind of weird, since you point that out. Yeah.
I mean, come on, dude.
And then it's like
What?
also murder, so it's like vengeance. It's like murder and vengeance. It's like the whole thing is.
No, yeah. I definitely think that is vengeance is definitely, I think, in the center of it all. Yeah, and we talked about earlier. There's two reasons why Joab would have a reason to be against Abner. Abner is part of Saul, and he is aligned. Joab is aligned with David, so he would naturally be against Saul, even though they should be united. It shouldn't be Israel and King of Judah, but they're Saul's people, and they're going against David, right? So they're not going to be with him. But then also we talked about, okay, Abner, he killed his brother Asahel, right? And we said, it probably leans more to the side that it's that he killed his brother versus these people don't align with the standards of God, and they don't align with David, who aligns with God. And so those are the two reasons. But we see he probably leans more against like a personal vendetta that he has, and it's kind of revealed here. We see at the end of the verse, for the he struck him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. So it kind of reveals probably what his motivation more was. So afterward, when David heard of it, he said, I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before the Lord for the blood of Abner and Abner the son of Ner. May it fall upon the head of Joab and upon all his father's house. And may the house of Joab never be without one who has discharge, or who is leprous, or holds a spindle, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had put their brother Asahel to death in the battle of Gibeon. Okay. What is David's response to this situation? Joab kills Abner.
He's saying he's innocent. And then the second thing is he like curses Joab.
Well, it's not even just Joab and
his whole family, like.
Yeah, and David's not even just talking on behalf of him. He's talking on behalf of who?
God.
Well,
His kingdom.
His kingdom, right? He's talking on behalf of Judah. He's saying, because I am king, and these are my people I rule over, this is what I stand for. And I think that's kind of what we were talking about earlier a little bit, is that David runs things completely differently than other people. Saul, you wouldn't see this going on with Saul. Saul wouldn't be like, Saul would think this person rightfully so died, and he would probably rejoice in it. But we see here that David is like, no, this is not what me and my kingdom stand for. We aren't going out to just randomly kill people and to shed blood for no reason. And so he's saying, on behalf of him and his kingdom, they are guiltless. This is not what we stand for. This is not what God stands for. That's on behalf of Joab and himself, not on behalf of us. And then, like you said, he curses them. He says, and it be on the head of Joab and all his father's house. So he's wanting it to go through generations of people. And may the house of Joab never be without one who has discharge, or who is leprous, or holds a spindle, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. Crazy stuff, right? That's pretty crazy. And it says, so Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had put their brother Asahel to death at the battle of Gibeon. Kind of clarifies again, he's like, hey, they killed him because as a way to get back for Asahel. And so we see what the character of Joab and his brother is. And even though Joab is commander, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's aligned with what David is saying, and David is establishing. I mean, he's just king of Judah right now, and he knows eventually, because of God's covenant, he's like, my kingdom is going to be beyond Judah at one time. Like, eventually I will be king over all of Israel. And so I think that this situation is probably important to David and other ones before this chapter, because he's establishing to his people from the very beginning. He's not even king of Israel yet. He's establishing from the very beginning, this is what I stand for, and this is what my kingdom will stand for. And it kind of reminds me of, like we talked about earlier with Joshua. Joshua says, we're stepping into this land. You have two options. You can serve the Lord, or you can leave. He says that me and my house will serve the Lord. So he kind of, through his kingship, he's giving people options. If you want to align with me, you're aligning with God and his standards and his morals. If you're not up with that, then you can go somewhere else, because my kingdom is not going to be about this type of stuff. And I feel like that's the main thing that kind of comes from that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also kind of like, it kind of reminds me like whenever Jesus comes in Matthew, he like has the whole Sermon on the Mount, and that's basically him saying like, this is what my kingdom looks like.
Yeah.
We don't tolerate this. This is what we're about.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah, and very against other like when Jesus comes, the stuff that he says, people are like, what? What are you talking about? Someone asks you to walk 1 mile, walk 2. Huh? What are you talking about? I mean, that's talking about like Jews. A Roman could just come up to them and be like, hey, I need you to carry my armor for 1 mile, and they would have to. And after 1 mile, the Roman would be like, okay, you can give me my stuff, you're done. And the Jew turns to them and says, no, I'll walk another with you. What? That's crazy. It's completely just like flipping your standards of what you think is right. Completely flipping it upside down, right? Completely different from what anyone else would do. And that's what David is establishing here. Very similar to what we see Jesus do. It's just completely different. We get to verse 31. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your clothes and put sackcloth and mourn before Abner. The king David followed the bier. They buried Abner at Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. And the king lamented for Abner, saying, should Abner die as a fool dies? Wash your hands were not bound, your feet not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. Okay, so what do we see David's perspective is here?
So this is very similar to Saul. And he mourns for Saul,
Mm-hmm.
and he mourns for Abner.
Mm-hmm.
And then after he does that, he leaves Saul a poem, or like poetry or something.
Mm-hmm.
He does the same thing here with Abner,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like as an anointed one, kind of like
I know.
Saul.
I don't know that about Saul, but like in this, like all the times he writes poetry and everything, it's like obviously he's lamenting. He's writing like sad, but
Yeah.
for the occasion, like it makes it like it's right. And also I had to look up the BIER.
Mm.
I thought like a briar patch, but it's a coffin. It has to do with a movable frame for a coffin, so it has to do with burial.
Hmm.
It's a corpse cremation, burial stuff.
Makes sense.
It's a carrying. It's the frame they use to carry it with.
Mm-hmm. I think my
That's the way you
translation
place it.
says coffin. I
It does say
think.
coffin.
Mhm.
Okay, I was gonna have the BIER. What is that?
I know, that's what I thought too when I read that, and I was like, I read this earlier, and that word wasn't there. And it's because I read a different translation. Mine says coffin, but yeah, that makes sense in the context. Yeah.
Okay, coffin easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we see, just like Rafi was saying, it's very similar to what happened with Saul. And again, he's completely flipping stuff upside down, because remember, Abner's on the other side, and if your enemy dies by the world's standards, you wouldn't think that you would mourn for them and lament and be sad about somebody who was against you dying, right? Even if Abner was like kind of flipping a switch at the end with what he was doing, and it was kind of coming to David's side, I think that if Abner still stayed on Saul's side, he would still lament in this way, because that's just who David's character is, I think.
But do you think he was mourning too, though, in the same sense of the Lord's anointed? Like he didn't feel like it was right from that perspective.
With
like
Abner,
it was God. Like yeah, he felt yeah.
I think that there's a tie to it with Saul being the Lord's anointed and Abner being a servant of Saul and what that represents. I think there could be probably a tie to that,
Okay.
yeah. And I think just David's character in general.
Yeah.
It's
He's a
also
sinner
it's
guy.
also the idea probably that Israel is still their people. They're
Mhm.
still with them under a covenant, but right now Israel and Judah are separated. So I think there might be some of that in there too. Like it's one of his brothers. Like they are under the covenant of God together, and so I think it might be maybe a little bit of that too.
I feel like probably the main thing he's thinking about, at least one of the main issues here, is the lack of justice.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, like, especially from what he says in his lamentation, I feel like that's kind of one of the big things on his mind here, is that there was no proper justice taken. So it feels like it just feels like injustice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for your hands were not bound and your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts? Go to the next slide.
Yeah, good.
Last slide.
And all the people wept again over him. Then all the people came to persuade David to eat bread while it was still day. But David vowed, saying, "May God do so to me, and more also, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun goes down." Now all the people took note of it, and it pleased them, just as everything the king did pleased all the people. So all the people in all Israel understood that day that it had not been the will of the king to put Abner the son of Ner to death. Then the king said to his servants, "Do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too difficult for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil."
Do you want to walk through the first one first? I think that's good.
Yeah. So, and all the people wept again over him. Then all the people came to persuade David to eat bread while it was yet day. But David swore, saying, "God do so to me and more also, if I taste bread or anything else till the sun goes down." So it's still building off of what we've been reading, but what's David's response?
He won't eat anything till the day's over. Still mourning for Abner.
It's not necessarily like a intentional callback, but it makes me think of what psalm was it we talked about it on, like, I think Sunday of the week. It was the one where he said, like, "I will not make my bed."
Yeah, Psalm 132.
That's 132?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Kind of reminds me of that kind of mindset where it's like David says, "I will not." You remember what the exact?
I will not give sleep to my head, rest to my eyes, something like that, until the Lord's work is done, or something like that. Let me find it. It's really good. Psalm 132.
Yeah. Verse 3.
Yeah, I will not enter my house or get in my bed. I will not allow my eyes to sleep or my eyelids to slumber until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob.
Yeah. So seems to me like it's a very similar mindset here. Obviously, you can kind of picture the scene. People are, urging him to eat. While it's still day, but David's not really focused on that right now. And we see the phrase again, "God do so to me and more also." So he's taking it very seriously. Definitely not what you'd expect from someone whenever the commander of their enemy dies. Well, I guess to be fair, he wouldn't have called Saul his enemy to begin with. But yeah.
What song?
What's that?
132.
132.
Okay.
It's like verse 3 through 5 or 6. And all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as everything that the king did pleased all the people. So, again, we see that this affects more than just himself. And he has an example to set. He has a kingdom to run. And so, obviously he's also considering this whenever he is doing what he's doing. And, yeah. So all the people and all Israel understood that that day it had not been the king's will to put to death Abner the son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, "Do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I was gentle today, though anointed king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, are more severe than I. The Lord repay the evildoer according to his wickedness." So, how does he refer to Abner?
A prince?
A prince and a great man? You know, Abner wasn't exactly the best guy, but, you know, just as we saw last chapter,
gracious.
yeah, he's being gracious, but he's also, it's kind of odd. He's actually exalting him quite a bit. It is interesting they calls him a prince, though.
Similar to what I said earlier about
Oh, I think
Saul wasn't a good man, but David made him good.
maybe in his emotional time, like that's part of his lament. Because I know he is lamenting, so it's lament as well.
What did you say, George?
That what he just said, where he called him a prince, that's part of his lamenting. Maybe. I mean, people get emotional, so I think it's continuing. And my summary is that 36, the people took note. 37, the will. So it's not his will to put him to death. And so I think David is being godly, and he's not pleased. He's not really pleased with this unrighteousness, this evil, this wickedness. He thinks it's like super bad. You're not this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's David's trying to do the right thing, but it's really sad that like this isn't what he wanted.
Right. And thankfully all the people noticed that. That's also a good sign.
And we see David's leadership again. Because remember the people that David's aligned with, he kind of accumulated them as he was on the run. And they're kind of all, I guess you call them like the misfits. I feel like that's like I guess more modern term to classify them as. But kind of all the people that were rejected by Saul that couldn't support themselves because Saul was taking and taking and taking. And so they come and align themselves with David, and David becomes their leader. And we see over and over again that David is training his people in the way, in the beliefs, and the moral system he believes in, which is in what God believes in, right? He's aligning them with those same morals. And whenever we see lines like, "and all the people wept again over him," it kind of shines through like what David's leadership is like, right? He's not just a good man on his own, but he knows how to lead the people around him in a correct manner. To where most people, yes, David could be weeping over Abner, but to see that David's people are also weeping over Abner and they have the same emotional response goes to show that David is very impressionable to the people that are around him, which again, like earlier we were talking about how the people that we surround ourselves with, and maybe Abner and his ways and how he surrounded himself with Saul, and that could have influenced him. We see the opposite of it, and we see these people that align themselves with David, and at one time they're telling David, "You need to kill Saul, you have the chance to kill him," and now these unrighteous, unjust things happen, and they weep with David. So you kind of see the contrast between those two things, and that David's a good individual. Yes, he's a man after God's own heart, but he's also a good leader too. And he's a leader for God's kingdom, most importantly.
Yeah. And so, I guess, looking at the chapter as a whole, we talked about all that's happened. Any applications? Because there's definitely a lot to take out of this whole chapter, I think.
What Brian said just then about who you surround yourself with, it's probably an effect.
Yeah, definitely. So I had a thought.
Oh. Any other application y'all can think of?
We do see that, that's what it was. Obviously this whole situation was not, it was definitely not a good thing. But we do see that regardless, it is still God's will being accomplished. So even though Abner getting killed actually helps David get to where he needs to be, he's still not happy about how it happened, but at the same time, God is using it to actually accomplish his will. And also, David did not have to put himself on the throne. That's the other thing. He didn't want to put himself on the throne. He wants it to be God doing that. And so, even though it was not a just action, in a sense, God is still working through Joab in that regard. So kind of like we were talking about earlier with the question of the day, God works through those things. It's not really application, I guess, but
Principle.
yeah, principle. God can use all those things.
Y'all got anything else before we close it out? Would anyone like to pray for us to end? I can pray for us. Lord, we thank you so much for this opportunity for us to gather as a group of believers, to come and sit down and dive into your word, and to be able to really dig deep into your word, and to figure out what your intentions behind each of these stories are, and to be able to find you and your goodness and your faithfulness and your love and your hesed, just woven in and out everywhere throughout these stories, Lord. We thank you for this opportunity, for this life that you've given us. We thank you for the breath in our lungs to be able to speak and talk while we're here, for giving us eyes to be able to see, for giving us ears to be able to hear. I pray that as we leave this study that we can think about the story and the principles and the application and everything we talked about tonight. We can walk out of the door today and we can take that with us for the rest of the week, that we can apply it in our lives in the ways that you want us to, and that we can maybe use it as a way to reach out to others, and to share who you are with others, so that we can be a light in the darkness, and so that glory can be given to you, our Father in heaven. Lord, we thank you for all you are and all that you do for us, and we pray that you are with each and every one of us as we leave here tonight. It's in your beautiful name we pray. Amen.
Amen.